Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Global South Women's Forum. Our session today is called Women, Marginalisation, and Displacement, Feminist Perspectives from the Global South. Before we begin our session, I just have a few housekeeping rules that I'd like to go through. So this session does provide interpretation in Thai and Hindi. Please go to interpretation to choose your language channel and mute original audio to only hear the interpreter. Welcome again to GSWF 2021. As participants, please do turn off your videos and mute your microphones. If you're experiencing any sort of slow bandwidth, please close unnecessary programs that may be running in the background of your device. Please feel free to use the public chat box to engage with one another as well as with our panelists throughout the session. This session is being live streamed on ERA Asia Pacific's Facebook page, and the recording will be available publicly afterwards. ERA Asia Pacific is committed to making GSWF 2021 an inclusive and safe digital environment, and we will not tolerate harassment of any kind, including but not limited to deliberate intimidation or sustained disruption of discussion. Participants are obliged to be respectful and to avoid replicating societal prejudices and inequalities. Participants who engage in disruptive behavior may be removed without prior notice. With this, I hand the session over to our moderator for today, Priyanka.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Yes, can we have this screen share, please? Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's 9 a.m. for us here in India, in South Asia. And our panel here today is delighted and privileged to be part of the Global South Women's Forum 2021. For the next 2 hours, academics and artists, or let's just say human beings, shall we, based in Bengaluru, the capital city of the South Indian state of Karnataka, India, will be deliberating on women, marginalization and displacement, feminist perspectives from the Global South. Let's look at our panelists. Well, ours is a multidisciplinary panel covering the disciplines of public policy, political science, economics, English, and the creative arts. We have Roshni Sharma, who's a political scientist and a teacher, and also a PhD research scholar in political science at Jain University, researching on refugee women narratives. Tanya Sengupta, an economist who also teaches the discipline at Mount Carmel College, and is also a PhD scholar in public policy at our university, researching on urban women migrants. Papya Bhattacharya, a science journalist, painter, poet, and a PhD research scholar who's doing her research in public health and policy. We're also joined with Suhasini Srihari. She's a writer, an artist, a faculty in English, doing her doctoral research at our university in post-colonial eco-criticism, critiquing the British ways in their concretization of masculinity and nation. And I'm there too, Priyanka Mathur. I teach politics, public policy, gender and migration studies at the Center for Research in Social Sciences and Education at Jain University, Bengaluru. The music presentation today is by Krishna, Priyobrato, Ronit, and Ridhita, who insist that they should not be acknowledged here, but instead let their music speak for them. Let's move on to the abstract. Well, our title today is Women, Marginalization and Displacement, Feminist Perspectives from the Global South. Our presentation intends to be in a storytelling format rather than, the typical academic paper readings that we usually see, on the themes of climate colonialism, climate mobility and migration, women's health and environmental justice, involving narratives of women who are also displaced and who are impacted by climate change and other precarities within the normative framework of the feminist theorization of the Global South. Climate-induced migration and its repercussions on gender has become a widely accepted phenomenon. Gender remains at the heart of any study on mobility, where it has become essential to understand the impacts of climate-induced migration on gender and the influence of gender on migration. It is this intersectionality lens, therefore, which is indispensable to understand how gender and climate-induced migration shape the experiences of men and women differently. Because we see in such a discourse, women affected by climate are usually considered vulnerable within the global south, as they lack the capacity to migrate and are dependent in comparison to the women belonging to the global north, who are seen as champions in dealing with climate change. Maybe not so recently, right? We will explore the gendered nature of natural calamities, as research has shown that women are more vulnerable with a higher mortality rate, taking examples of cyclones in the South Asian region. And the hard-hitting fact is that though natural disasters have shown their gender discriminatory impact towards women, till date in many countries in South Asia, particularly like India and Bangladesh, we've had no women-centric disaster management policy. We also look at women's health and environmental justice thus. We hope to spotlight the policy lacunae and also, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, how that has had a gendered impact. And we also want to look at how women and communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases, as well as the effect of the pandemic on regular health monitoring. And we do it all through the power of art, poetry, and music that will weave its way into the path that we traverse for the next 2 hours. Because it is the arts that teach us hope, and hope is all we have. Next.
Good morning, everyone. This is Suhasini, and I would like to begin my presentation by displaying this sketch before you. Here, you see a reflection of how our world looks like. The hourglass is representative of the fact that we are running out of time, and that if we don't act now, then it would be too late for us to repent in time. It all boils down to us, that is the women, who bear the curse of consequences, and now we take the responsibility to set things right. Nothing better than Sojourner Truth's words express my thoughts. If Eve, that one woman of God, could turn the world upside down, then all of us together could turn the world right side up once again. I now present before you a poetic story. It comprises of 26 lines, with each line beginning with the letters of the English alphabet in order. Please notice, this is an attempt to understand our real plight, our real struggles in the language that we are taught, that we learn from. I hope you enjoy this video. Right. To sum it up, the gist of this poem is simply this, that we have taken our planet for granted. And it is high time that we realize our mistakes and set things right. Now, moving forward, I lay down before you the theoretical frameworks. The first one is the feminist principle. Our outlook, that is our data collection and then the theorization of it, everything is contextualized in these theoretical frameworks. The first one being the feminist principle, where we deploy the tenets of ecofeminism. Ecofeminism is a branch of feminism that examines the connections between women and nature. So in order to counter the representations of women as the other or as the subaltern, ecofeminism provides the credos of equality between genders, a revaluing of non-patriarchal or non-linear structures, and a holistic view towards our connections with nature. In questioning the established power structures, we examine the very idea of development that is imposed on us by the Western modernity. Now, the only way possible for us to understand the impact of Western modernity and our inability to counter environmental crises is through experiences narrated. Therefore, the next theoretical framework aims to contextualize the procured data in the narrative form. Narratives, as you know, have existed in all our cultures from probably Stone Age. Tales, jokes, novels, films, news programs, all of these and numerous others allow an individual, allow a person to learn about history, the present day events, or future. Simple or complex, these narratives can be seen as meta-language that would enable us to approach our object of study as a narrative discourse. It is here that we begin to consider that our sound understanding of the marginalized and displaced voices emerge from their experiences narrated to the rest of the world. Let's understand more about this through our data.
Migration is difficult to estimate accurately, and there is no comprehensive system which registers migration. However, the data provided by IDMC 2021 depicts that more than 98% of the 30.7 million new displacements in 2020 were the result of weather-related disasters, such as storms and floods, and concentrated in East Asia, Pacific, and South Asian regions. 5 countries accounted for more than 60% of the new internal displacement due to disasters. As we can see it up on the slide, China with 5.1 million, Philippines with 4.4 million, Bangladesh with 4.4 million, India with 3.9 million, and the United States with 1.7 million respectively. The next slide, please. The top 5 countries with the highest number of internally displaced persons due to the disasters were Afghanistan with 1.1 million, India with 0.09 million, Pakistan with 0.8 million, Ethiopia with 0.6 million, and Sudan with 0.4 million. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many people stayed in their exposed homes during disasters, despite early warnings because of fear of infection. There is an upward trend in terms of the displacement figures that we see. Next slide, please. Around the world, women tend to be marginalized from political and economic power that has given them limited access to financial and material resources. In all the regions that have been shown previously on the world map, women bear severe gendered impacts of climate change without equal representation in decision-making or policy design. Women living in the global south particularly are the most vulnerable group affected by climate change and its consequences, as they are 14 times more likely to be exposed to violence or the rate of mortality is high during and after climate events. As the data on the slide shows, women constitute 80% of the total climate-induced displaced population. Next slide, please.
Here is a painting on women and how climate change and even otherwise situations force women throughout the world to have to fetch water and look after water needs of the family. Whether it is a disaster or a cyclone or an avalanche, it is women who have to source fresh water for potable purposes. And in the middle of saltwater flooding, that is again what they have to do. And this probably results in infection and various other waterborne diseases. The next slide, please. I have here a poem that I would like to present to you on how throughout the ages, perhaps 100 years ago, and even today, nature and humanity has not really cared so much for women. The poem is entitled, "They Do Not Care." Nature, they say, is overpowering, engulfing. The ice on the high mountain peaks turns rivers into flood to bay for people's lives. Rains, they kill and they maim, drown homes, livelihoods. From the polluted realms they come, hound our hopes, set them up in flame, turn us to ashes. We are the gentle, the kind. We are mothers, sisters, daughters. We love, we care, we nurture. Every human around we bind with sweet love. Then why don't they care? Leave us to the mercies of nature. The rain, floods, rising seas, devastation and its dare, they do not care. Next slide, please. So climate change has untold effect on the health of women, as we find. This particular map here highlights 130 studies done worldwide to show how women and men are affected by climate change, how their health is affected by climate change. You see the purple blue dots here. These are the statistics of men whose health has been affected in various disasters. And the orange circles represent women whose health has been affected, the number of women. Each circle is a study. The impacts that have been studied, they include death and injury from extreme weather, food insecurity, infectious disease, mental illness, and poor reproductive and maternal health. And as you do see, in the global south, as well as elsewhere, the number of orange circles exceed the number of purple circles in number, which shows that indeed there's more women whose health is affected than men in areas of climate change. Next.
In continuation to what my friends have narrated so far, we would like to analyze the forced displacement data of South Asia in this segment. Conflicts and natural disasters are the two important push factors behind forced displacement. Over the last decade, it has been noticed that it is the natural disaster that had displaced more people than violence and conflict. As per GREED 2020 data, in 2019, disaster displacement was 9.5 million as compared to 0.5 million violence displacement in South Asia, which was highest post 2012. Next slide. Of course, as a result, South Asia has emerged as a global hotspot for disaster displacement in recent times, with 95% forced displacement due to natural disaster. Among South Asian countries in 2019, India topped worldwide in new disaster displacement with a number of 5 million people. However, as per GREED 2021 report, in 2020, Bangladesh has overtaken India with 4.4 million new disaster displacement, whereas in India, the number is 3.8 million. However, the two countries are still managed to secure the position among the top 5 countries worldwide. Next slide. As far as the impact of climate disaster is concerned, we all know, and UNDP report also found that a person in developing countries was 79 times more likely to be affected by climate disaster than someone in a wealthier country. Moreover, poverty is not gender equal. And if you are a woman and from a developing nation, impoverished, the vulnerability is much higher. It has been noticed that women and girls are often unable to escape a climate disaster, and they are the one who suffers the most in this situation. Next slide. In the last 2 decades, South Asian countries have experienced the natural calamities like drought, like flood, earthquake, etc. However, it was n number of storms and cyclones that have hit the countries like India and Bangladesh with a greater extent. There were 8 tropical storms that hit these countries only in 2019. Cyclone played a disastrous role in people's life, which led to displacement. As mentioned earlier, climate disaster left a high level of socio-economic vulnerabilities, particularly towards women, girls, and other vulnerable groups of the society. To give a glimpse of it, we can see in this picture that women made up 90% of Cyclone Gorky casualties in Bangladesh. In Indian Ocean tsunami, 70% of the total fatalities were women. The cyclone Foni in Odisha, India, led 18 lakhs people to displace. Cyclone Amphan last year displaced nearly 8,20,000 women, including over 49,316 pregnant women, 29,133 female-headed households. Now, we will move on to our music section, where our theory will be expressed with the help of a beautiful musical rendition.
Thank you, Tanya. We've seen the data, we've heard the stories of how horrific the physical impact of disaster displacement can be. In our next musical piece, we also explore the kind of psychological and spiritual angst and anguish that can be brought about by such displacement, because a person's sense of identity, their spiritual center, is very much linked to a particular place they identify as home. And when you're displaced, this can lead to a lot of psychological and spiritual disorientation. So we draw from the tradition of the Bauls, who are a wandering sect of spiritual seekers in the Bengal region of India and Bangladesh. And they speak of this spiritual seeking and want. So with that, we'll go to the video.
কবে সাধু চরণ ধুলি মোর লাগবে গান। কবে সাধুর চরণ ধুলি মোর লাগবে গান। ভজন সাধন আমাতে নাই, কেবল মহৎ নামে দিগো দোহাই। শুনেছি সাধু করুণা, সাধুর চরণ পরশিলে হয় গো সোনা।
Swasni, can you just check? Is it frozen from her end? Is there a Wi-Fi issue from Swasni's end?
Yeah, it's frozen for me too. So.
Okay.
Yes, it's frozen.
Yeah, it's frozen from her end. Okay. Nadia, is it possible that I can do the screen share? Maybe there's some issue at Swasni's end with the Wi-Fi. Tanya, can you just quickly Swasni?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'll just do it. Apologies for this.
রোশিনে হয় গো সোনা।
I'm sure you'd all agree with me that that was absolutely beautiful and soulful. Music truly knows no barriers. But what is important is at this moment to bring in the intersectionality of gender, displacement, and climate. Yes, there is the power of music because music gives words when there is silence. And today we know that world over, there is silence in the narrative of women. Women who are displaced and affected by climate change have no voice. They are rendered even more helpless, even more powerless, without any agency whatsoever. They live in dire conditions of health, absence of the right to health, absence of jobs, absence of the right to education, and are deprived of their entire agency. And compounded with this rights deprivation is the onslaught of the systemic failures. Because when nature fires its salvo at you, if you do not have the protection of the state, where else will the helpless women go to? We are right now at a situation where the state and the system is completely rendered vulnerable to the impact of nature. In this entire scenario and in the bigger picture, we therefore also question that what kind of development is this? The right to development at the end of the day should empower not just the state to enhance its GDP, but also each one of us as citizens of the state to improve our own lives. But do we really question this developmental paradigm? A paradigm which perpetuates and enhances the gender inequality within which it's entrenched. So we need to ask the question that what development and development for whom? Swasni?
Yes. Am I audible? Right. As mentioned earlier, it comes down to redefining development in a manner most suited to the developing countries. So a development that balances and sustains the ecology of the planet. So the concept of development imposed on us is structured mainly on the tenets of Western patriarchy and Western modernity. Therefore, it is not inclusive of local conditions nor of the local knowledges. Even to this day, indigenous knowledges are not completely accepted by the Western sciences. Examining the Western development imprint, we look back to the colonization period, which would bring us directly to the position of the women. There is still an insufficient and an inadequate participation of women in development projects, and they are still struggling to liberate themselves from the already imposed notion of development. The big question is that how can more women participate and be heard? Again, it is through narratives. So what can a narrative do? Narrative experiences can help us recognize the real problems. It provides access to a larger number of the general public and far less intimidating than scientific jargons. Stories may lack in providing statistics, but the experiences narrated, particularly of the marginalized and the displaced, invite an empathetic approach in governance. In a way, a narrative discourse involves the reality, which is approached with an empirical rigor of theory and attempting to bridge the gap between theory and praxis. Now we see how narratives are contextualized once again through data. Next.
There's an active relation between climate change and the way women's health is affected by climate change. As you see on the left, these are the various kinds of climate change events that lead and pose risks to women's health. There are increasing heat events. The air quality is getting poorer. There are hurricanes, there are floods, there are wildfires. There's a certain degree of food insecurity. There are waterborne diseases. Also, the way infectious diseases have spread across the world has changed, as we see with COVID-19. There is a climate-induced environment change that also leads to human migration. People are moving from area to another area, and that also poses a risk to the health of women in various ways. The first is there is a huge gender disparity in various areas of the world, particularly in the global south versus the global north. There are physiological vulnerabilities. There are biological vulnerabilities among women, as are cultural vulnerabilities and socioeconomic vulnerabilities, which lead to these risks being more to women's health in the global south. Next slide, please. Also, women's health, the various factors that affects women's health and climate change, as we saw in the previous slide, that leads to a certain degree of affectation of the mental health among women. As we see here, women and their health are therefore very vulnerable to climate change. Women in the drier areas of India, women in the rural areas of India, of South Asia and elsewhere are affected. However, one would like to advocate for maybe a change in perspective where we could look at women not as passive victims of climate change, but what if we look at them as being proactive? What if we look at them as being involved in being agents of hope in various agencies where we could close the knowledge gaps regarding the vulnerability of women to climate change. We do not have enough data about how exactly women are affected in the various sectors. What if we make women proactive and engage them in advocating all these and closing the gaps in these various areas, and then perhaps we will have a better representation. Vulnerability is also driven by poverty, inequality, and poor representation in governance, as we all know, in various areas of the world. Next slide, please. So, like I said, there's a certain gender disparity among men and women, and even among women in parts of the world. There's certainly a limited literature on gender and climate change. Two themes are very prominent here. One looks at women either as vulnerable in relation to the environment, or one looks at women as virtuous. Both these representations could actually deflect attention and make decision-making more unequal. These gender gaps perhaps need to be closed, and therefore new economic, political, education, and health criteria have been developed. And it shows that South Asia and Central and South Africa have the highest levels of gender disparity among males and females. So perhaps if we contextualize these debates and enable action through women and by women, we can probably effectively respond to all these adverse effects in various areas and particular places. Next slide, please. And as we saw since last March, the COVID-19 pandemic has only brought to the fore all these existing structural inequities among various sectors of society. Other than climate change, COVID-19 has certainly created a certain degree of marginalization, but has also exposed the existing marginalizations. It has interlinked and interconnected and led to new challenges, vulnerabilities, and burdens, and reinforced the old ones. Next, please.
To add on to what my friend was talking about, the literature that has been written on the subject highlights that there are two predominant images of climate-induced women migrant. Women from the global south particularly are considered as vulnerable as they lack the capacity to migrate and are dependent on their male counterparts. On the contrary, women in the global north are seen as champions in dealing with climate change. Further, in global south, the image is that of poor and helpless, whereas women in the global north are considered to be more well-educated and pro-environmentalist. Next slide, please. Let's look at some of the stories of women being impacted by climate change. Rosela Tikala, 33-year-old mother of 6 from Philippines, says, "We were trapped in the house for 2 days until someone came and rescued us in a boat, and we were taken to the local gymnasium, which was being used as an evacuation center. We stayed there for a week, but it was so crowded that we decided to leave and go back to our house. It proved impossible to live there as well, so we left after another week and spent the next 5 weeks staying with relatives. I don't know what the future holds," she says. "We are not allowed to go back and live in the place where our old house stood. As the government says, it's at the risk of flooding if there is another typhoon. We will have to find somewhere else to live and build a house there, but I don't know when." The next slide, please. The next story is of a 34-year-old Raju from Pakistan who says, "I was 7 months pregnant when we had to migrate due to drought in our village. I traveled on camel and worked as a laborer. As a result, I lost my unborn baby. My family took rupees 10,000 loan from landowner for my medical checkup and treatment. I went into depression after losing my baby." The concern that my friend Papia raised while explaining the mental health issues of climate-induced women migrants. The next story highlights the issue of nexus dynamics, stating that the adverse effects of climate change are linked to conflict and violence. Lao Women from Sudan says, "Because of severe drought, my family and I moved permanently to the river some distance away. But this was difficult because of fighting going on in that area, and eventually we moved because of it." The next story is that of Betsina, from a fisherwoman from Tanimar Island. She says, "Previously the weather change was manageable. Now the weather in recent years has gotten worse. It has become more difficult to sail the sea, especially for those using rowing boats. The sea," she says, "is not safe for us anymore." The last story of Nurul Hashim, a school teacher from Bangladesh, brings out how displaced people are always on the move and there is no certainty. She says, "The seawater is rising every day. We lost everything. We are not happy because we must move again. Climate change is making thousands of people homeless." Next slide, please.
Here are some more stories from South Asia, particularly from India and Bangladesh. These stories obviously raise question on women's dignity, prejudice of the society, and the safety and security of the women post-disaster. The first narrative goes like this. A woman from a village in Odisha, India, told that she was found half naked post the cyclone Fani. She told that, "I had to tear my only sari for my daughter to use as a period's rag. I also had to spare my only blouse for that purpose too." Cyclone Fani had taken everything from them, and Sanitary pads, we have to remember, are still not under the top priority of relief packages. So of course, that raises the question of dignity of a woman. The second story is, we will narrate in the words of another adolescent girl from Arakura village, India. She told that I had to walk with my mother to Chilka Lake twice a day, once before dawn and once after dusk, to wash my used periods rag. The place is deserted, dark, and the water is saline. Cyclone Fani has destroyed their private toilet at their home, and she cannot use the used period rags in the flowing artesian wells in the village, even when it is dark, as in the village it is considered to be inauspicious. Her narratives, of course, raise the question of prejudice against women, particularly during the climate disaster. Another voice is of Sukanti Behra, a resident of a village in Odisha, India. She said that we get goosebumps as the darkness approaches. We are worried about the safety for our daughters and daughter-in-laws. Therefore, we all decided to sleep at an open space near the local police station at night, because police will be there to protect us. So natural disaster raises the question of safety and security of women as well. The fourth narrative is collected from a brothel. It's an individual story collected from a brothel in Bangladesh, which revealed the miserable condition of the outcast of the society after the cyclone Amphan in 2020. The brothel consists of 37 houses with 93 sex workers living with their 65 children. The cyclone Amphan damaged all their houses. The whole night they fought against the cyclone but could not save their only water purifier at the brothel. And being the sex worker outcast of the society, they cannot go and collect their water, drinking water, which is there inside the village where the villagers collect their water. However, local government assured that the damage is under the plan of restoration, but till then they have to wait for it. Now, we will move on to our music section, which will describe the pain of women.
Thank you again, Tanya. So as our previous speakers have been telling us very, very grim stories about how we are wreaking violence and havoc on it's not just natural disasters, and we haven't just wreaked violence on nature and nature is paying us back today, but the natural disasters are linked to conflict as well. We subject each other to violence, and this coming piece actually uses these imageries. One of the pieces used here is from a series of pieces called the Songs of Spain, which is said to have been part of which is said to have been composed in the backdrop of such conflict in Spain. And then we also use a piece by Rabindranath Tagore, where he talks of a world frenzied with violence and prays for deliverance from such a world. So with that, we'll go to the piece. The audio is not coming for me, is that?
sure we are all in silence with this beautiful and soulful rendering of the music. Let's also take a step back and think of the politics of silence that surrounds all of this. The politics of silence that keeps the voices of the women out of the narratives and the academic discourses. We need to keep asking this question that why the voices matter and where are the voices? The gender inequality discourse in the world around us today ensures a silencing of these women's voices. And today, increasingly, in all discourses, we are bringing gender back in. We are engendering displacement, we are engendering migration studies, and we are engendering refugee studies. In 1951, the UN Convention for Refugees had hardly taken cognizance of the gender impact of displacement and migration. And just a few years ago, we had a new normative framework come up in the Global Compact of Refugees and the Global Compact of Migration. Yes, the word gender did come in, but only 32 times in the entire text of the document. It may be a bit too early for us to celebrate that we are recognizing gender, because there's still a far, long way for us to go. The UN Convention on Refugees, in its definition of refugees, outlines 5 fears of persecution and 5 reasons why, we bring a refugee and give the refugee a legal status. However, displacement because of environmental reasons is not one of the causes. The reality exists that environmental refugees still remain within quotation marks in the world today. Should we not step in and ask, why is that still so?
Right. In tangent with examining the traditions of the West, the following content discusses more on what is being lost. Just as in the colonial period, an assumption dominates that either Western science and rationality are more advanced or refined than other positions. It is here that we have to investigate, or rather recognize in the first place, what exactly is holding us behind. Knowledge is still seen in its singular form. So anything that deviates from this norm is considered an error, considered something as fallible. It is in this context that the domination of Western knowledge must be examined, which would enable us to recognize the geopolitics of power. On this note, we will listen to the voices of the marginalized and displaced. Next.
Indigenous women, Black women, women from low-income communities, and women from the global South bear an even heavier burden for the impact of climate change because of the historic and continuing impacts of colonialism, racism, and inequality. And in many cases, because they are more reliant upon natural resources for their survival and live in areas that have poor infrastructure. And the following 2 videos brings out these voices.
L'eau, notre rivière qui est proche de nous à peut-être 200 mètres, qui est arrivée, casse les cases, dévaste le champ, tout est dévasté, même ce que nous portons à la maison, et nous restons en problème. Kaka tronomima esikwele miaka glome kaka ba inkatani na kule miaka aglikente so to inkakaje nyum kwante binye kule ka kule sonya emile ifukwe me emile plebli le tout le jour là wa mila glome 14 heures jita jaja mile tout koto vinye kaka mi baba ho mi kaka liji wa mila glome
14 edita jaja ne do molo kunye kuto vinye kaka
The audio is not there. Could you please raise?
So Asni, shall I close? Will you share, please? I think so. There's some problem here. Sorry.
Sure.
Thank you. Apologies for that. We are in the Global South.
Did we finish watching this video completely?
Yes.
Okay. Because it was being... Okay.
সাইক্লোন ছিল কিন্তু বারবার মাস 2 বছর পরে 1.5 বছর পরে এরকম হইতো না
প্রথম তো মনে করেন বন্যার সাইলেন্স দিয়েছে সাইলেন্স দেওয়ার পর তো সবাই সতর্ক থাকছে তো গ্রামের সতর্ক হয়েছে রাস্তায় সিরিয়া যেকাল পানি ঢুকছে সকাল 10টা হইতে পানি ওরা শুরু করছে সারাদিন পানি উঠছে আমার কোনো জায়গায় যাওয়ার পথ ছিল না বাড়ি ঘর সবারই তলায় গেছে যাওয়ার পর আমরা সবাই
পানি উঠছে পানিতে কোথায় যাব আমার 2টা বাচ্চা ছিল একটা 10 বছর একটা 5 বছর এই 2টা বাচ্চা নিয়ে আমি পরিশুদ্ধ মেলা করছি সেই সময় এই সমান পানি সেই অবদাস ফোটার পরে এই যে পানির স্রোতে আমরা 3 মাইল এই জায়গায় পড়ে গেছি পরে যাওয়ার পরে আমার ছোট বাচ্চাটাও হাতে কোনো ছুটে গেছে আর ওই 10 বছরের মেয়েও ছুটে গেছে
কি করবো সে স্টাফ নেই 10 জন স্টাফ থাকে তাদের জন্য হালকা করতে দিনে তারপর ওদেরকে বলছে যে তোরা সুস্থ হওয়া যখন আমি নিজে আসি তখন তো কোনো ভয় নেই এই কথা বললে আমরা যখন কাছারে চলে আসি এখন তো আমরা অনেক লোকদের কান্দাকাটি করে এলাকার লোকে তো জানে যে ট্রেনে নাইস মনে মরে গেছে তার জন্য আমার একটা লোক মারা গেছে এই মারা যাওয়ার পরে আমরা অনেক বিচারবিচি করার পাইনি না পাওয়া নেই
ছুটে যাওয়ার পর 20 মিনিট পর আমার বাচ্চা কোলেরটা পাওয়া গেছে সেই পর আমার বড় বাচ্চাটা পাইনি না পাওয়ার পরে আমি পরিষদে চলে গেছি আমার বাচ্চা নিয়ে সেই পর ভোরে সেইখান থেকে আইসি আইয়ে আমার বাচ্চা শুনছি মানে নিয়ে আসছে গাছ দরজা ছিল সেই বাসায় আইয়ে আমার ঘর দরজা কিছুই পাইনি থাকবো কই
দীর্ঘ 2 দিন কোনো খাওয়া দাওয়া ছিল না কেউ মনে করেন লাঠি ছিল না পাখির ঘর ছিল না ঘরে ওড়ার কোনো তো মনে করেন আমার পানি কেজি খাইতে পারি না সব কিছু লবণ পানি পুষ্কুনি নাই বা আমার থার জায়গা নাই বা কেউ ডায়রিয়া হয়েছে কেউ দেখছি ঠান্ডা জ্বর হয়েছে অনেক ক্ষয়ক্ষতি মানে আমাগো এলাকায় সবারই হয়েছে এখন যদি 2 মাস পর বা 2 সপ্তাহ পর আবার সেটা তাহলে তো আমাকে বাঁচার কোনো পথই নেই বাঁচার কোনো পথ নেই আমরা হাঁস মুরগি বা পালি কেমন করে আর ফসল বা কেমন করে দেবো আর খাওয়া দাওয়া কেমন করে চলবে এরকম থাকলে তো আমার খাওয়া দাওয়া চলবে না তাছাড়া মনে করেন আমাকে বাঁচার পথ নেই আবার সেটা যদি আসছে না বড় তো আমরা কেমন করে বাঁচবো
সাইক্লোন ছিল না
So heart-wrenching stories from Global South. Now in this segment, we are going to summarize what kind of impact disasters have on women and why the disasters are so gender biased. To begin with, if we talk about the basic services, access to basic services post-disaster, we can say that female-headed households were less likely to have access of safe water points, and displaced community people hardly have access to any safe water point. The reason is during disaster, women and girls are more vulnerable to abuse and attack while walking to collect water. So again, it's a question of security and safety of women. Now let's come to food items. Though food items are the top priority needs, food insecurity was identified as a significant crisis, and especially for women, girls, lactating and pregnant mothers. Women have unmet nutrition demand in this situation of disaster. The picture in this context, which you can see itself, is depicting how relief packages are collected. And of course, you can see it is subjected to masculinity. We can see negligible women are there to collect the relief packages. And that's how the society functions, particularly in least developed or developing countries. Next slide, please. Now, as far as the distribution and control of relief fund is concerned, again, it is the influential men in the community, those who makes all the decision. And in many cases, women-headed families are left out. Already we have talked about the menstrual hygiene of women. Here we can say that as far as, about women's menstrual hygiene management, which we have already discussed, as I said, we have seen that sanitary rags or sanitary pads are not top priority in the disasters relief list. So both women living in their home and the displaced women prioritize reusable clothes. But again, washing those periods rags also subject to prejudice, which we have already heard from a narrative. Therefore, often women are left with unmet hygiene requirement in this situation. Next slide. During the cyclone or any other disaster in Global South or South Asia particularly, women also considers toilets in shelters are the most unsafe and insecure place, particularly at night. In many cases, there is no proper toilet or there are no toilets at all. Mostly, toilets are without accommodating the needs of a person with disabilities. There is no access to safe bathing place for women. And it has been also reported that female-headed households have less than half access to safe bathing place than the male-headed households. Next slide. Sexual harassment, rape, trafficking during cyclone is from the relief camp are often, it has been often noticed and often reported. Women perceive shelters as insecure places where they would have to sacrifice their privacy, because in most of the cases, there is no separate shelters for men and women. And in most of the time, the shelters are overcrowded and occupied by the men. Therefore, in many cases, the households that are male-headed there, the head of the family or the male members don't allow the women to go to the shelters during the disaster. And as a result, they are bound to stay in their destroyed house. Here in this picture, we can see the shelters are obviously overcrowded and there is no separate shelters for men and women. Now the question is, why climate disaster is so gender biased? Next slide. So here is a trivia. We can see the unbearable or miserable condition of the women post-disaster. Next slide. Now, why is it so gender biased? The reason is in South Asia, illiteracy among women, coupled with lack of information, followed by movement restriction. Movement restriction in the sense women are often not able to take the decision of going out without the permission of the head or male member of the family. Often their traditional responsibility also put them into such disastrous situation. To give you an example, when Gorky hit Bangladesh, that is in 1991, most of the women were culturally and socially isolated at home as traditional caregivers, responsible for children, responsible for elders, and they likely either did not hear the warning, or they had to care for others as well as themselves and their properties. Many also would not evacuate without their husband or another male member to accompany. They have to accompanied by a male member of the family. One interesting point here is that in countries like Bangladesh, India, the traditional attire also creates a hindrance of movement. The attire that I'm wearing today is a sari, and that is one of the traditional attire, which creates a hindrance to move, to swim, to climb a tree during the disaster. And here, the women, because of cultural reason, socio-cultural reason, they have to wear it, particularly those who are from the lower strata of the society. So that also another reason behind the suffering of the women and more casualties. Now, my friend has mentioned earlier that disasters leave impact badly on the physical and mental health of the women. Next slide. So here is a study on that, on the mental health of the women. It has been found that the initial reaction post-disaster is emotional numbness, withdrawal syndrome, shock, and fear of safety. Whereas the long-term reactions are depression, vague bodily symptom, difficulty in forming trusted relationship, feeling of guilt, anxiety, etc. There was a research on women's emotional responses post the disaster of Gorky, and it has been noticed that 66% of women, 66% of affected women, they have a fear for safety post the cyclone, followed by 17% with withdrawal syndrome, and 14% with emotional numbness, 3% shock. So to conclude this segment, we can say that the women, the children, the mothers, the women, the girls, they are the one who suffers the most because of socio-economic condition. Next.
So we have spoken about the need of a changed perspective to look at climate change discussions. And perhaps there is need of a gendered perspective where we look at climate changes and how it affects women through the lens of a perspective of a gender-specific notion through women's eyes. Integration of this kind of a changed perspective into existing climate development and disaster risk reduction policies would perhaps need more data, better data, monitoring of women in various areas. For example, health could be an area, security could be another area, non-reproductive health could be an area, because women are mostly their health, the main focus of health in women is generally the reproductive health of a woman. What happens to the pre and the post-reproductive women, that is not really looked at. There needs to be a certain coordination between sectors throughout, and of course, an equitable stakeholder engagement. This could perhaps come if we look at empowering women as educators, as caregivers, particularly in the global South and also in the global North. Women are caregivers of old people, of children, of sick parents, sick relatives. They also happen to be in traditional societies in India and South Asia. They happen to be holders of knowledge of local herbs, knowledge of local plants, as well as modern knowledge. And if we look upon them as agents of social change, then perhaps mitigation and adaptation policy can be improved. Next slide, please. So women have been singled out as climate victims. However, if that were changed and we look upon them, as I keep on saying, as powerful agents of change, because they have this traditional women environment linkage, which has always been seen to be very influential. Next slide, please. So scientists have estimated that by 2030, the impact of climate change will not be able, one cannot reverse it. So they argue about the importance of women segregated data. So here are two examples which kind of illustrate how involving women and focusing on them can lead to better outcomes. The first example is the decrease of the maternal mortality rates in India from 2015 to 2018. And this was done by focusing on women's health, on some basic practices, and has resulted in a certain degree of decrease in the maternal mortality rate in all areas throughout India that are affected by climate change. Last week, the BRICS and Women's Business Alliance report was released, and that has also highlighted of how one can involve women and increase their local participation in the economy. That would be a more inclusive economy in the areas of healthcare, in innovative development, particularly such as climate smart agri-technology. In Southeast Asia, women play a huge part in on-ground farming, in sowing seeds, in looking after crops, and climate smart agri-technology would lead to probably women growing agri-smart, climate-smart crops. For example, in areas of flooding, we have rice varieties that have been developed indigenously in India that could be resistant to salt water. We have rice varieties that need very little water, which can be grown in areas of drought, of the areas that have been continuously affected by drought. So that climate-smart technology can be easily implemented by women. In areas of food security, in areas of environmental safety, public policy, if we involve more women and their participation is increased, it does lead to a lot of hope and positive changes. Next slide, please. Finally, climate change is perhaps not just a scientific and a technology problem to be solved by a lot of formulas, but one has to look at it holistically. So maybe when one talks about climate change and development, one has to talk about environmental health, habitats. Today we have changing habitats. People in the Sundarbans are changing their traditional ways of living. Livelihoods, how does one community make a livelihood? Do we really have communities today that depend solely on forests for a living? We do not. They have partially they depend on forests and partially they depend on maybe a job that they do. Transforming ideologies, that is your transforming ideologies. We do not live in a world that is dominated today by traditional knowledge. Economies of domination, exploitation. Women have been traditionally exploited. Marginalized communities have been traditionally exploited. And perhaps one has to look at all that to address this seeming problem of climate change, which is not a very single dimensional problem. There are issues that marginalized people face. One has to take into account their healthcare too. They must figure in climate change. And finally, water-related, for example, water-related problems throughout the world are central to climate change adaptation. And in here, civil society, marginalized populations and women must be involved because they are the primary section of the population that is involved in looking for potable water. Next slide, please. Yes, so I will now make way for our musicians on this note of hope where we are changing our perspectives.
You can share the video.
Okay, thank you, Papia. Yes, maybe I will share my screen so that I can directly play the video here. So as Papia has pointed out, she has shown a glimmer of hope in the right direction in which we can go after some really horrific stories that we heard from our earlier presenters. So this upcoming piece, we try to portray the hope that we must have if we are to, continue and set things right. So with that, I will share my screen and yes. All right. Sorry about this. I will just check if I've shared the audio as well. Yeah. Okay.
you, Ronit. Swasni, can you see the screen? As you can see, we have changed the narrative. From despair and sadness, we move now towards hope, towards agency and change. We look at a rights-based approach. Where does the intervention begin? When we look at women not just as helpless victims, but we look at women who are subject to displacement and to the wrath of nature as active bearers of their own rights. And it is this rights-based approach that we need to bring into all policy making. You know, I dabble with refugee studies. That's been my area of research for the last 20 years. And we have a very simple saying there that for refugees, not without them. So if you're having an international conference on refugees, we ensure that we make that there are some speakers who are refugees themselves. So when we're talking about women, we should ensure that the women are also brought into the decision-making space. So if you're talking about bringing in gender equality, let's give them the voice and ask them, where do they want the start? How do they think that the change can come to them? It's important for us not just to have a top-down approach at their vulnerability, but to look at it bottoms up and see and bring them on to the board through a participatory approach on the ways in which we can empower them. As the famous saying says, when you empower a woman, you change and empower an entire village. Rights bring in agency, rights bring in confidence, and rights propel change. The way forward is to look at a gendered narrative of rights. Next slide.
Yes, keeping in mind to include the women in the entire decision making, it is important for us to fall back onto the narrative discourses. Therefore, this entire argument boils down to why is storytelling important in environmental humanities? Storytelling is without any doubt indispensable, for nowhere is the awareness of non-human agency more evident than in the traditions of narratives. For instance, Herman Melville, who is deeply interested in the study of marine animals, his views got expounded at length rather in Moby Dick, one of those classical texts which is widely read even to this day. Therefore, the need of the hour is an amalgamation of literary and scientific interests. This would enable us to understand the problem better and also enable us to perceive environment in tangent with our cultural memories. More to this on the note of hope in the following duration.
So as a ray of hope, as they say, when women thrive, all of the society benefits. Here are some stories or practical example of women coming together, serving the society as a community-based program. So there is K. Uma and 652 other women in the neighboring of a colony in Odisha, West Bengal, who refused to be complacent. And they band together to create a resilience fund, a go-to fund they can use to take care of small expenses and activities linked to pressing needs that follow immediately after any disasters. In the words of Uma, we started talking as we regrouped after the cyclone funny. So as a part, all 653 of them belonging to 60 slums contributed rupees 200. And they have received a compensation of rupees 2,000 from the state government after the cyclone. K. Uma explained that as word spread through the colonies of a common women fund, more women came up to contribute. And currently they have a fund of over 1,30,000. And it still continues. Each month, all the women contribute 10 rupees towards the fund to build it up. Second story is from Sundarban. Again, here is a group of women across several remote villages in Sundarban, West Bengal, in India, have added one more task to their long list of daily chores after experiencing the cyclone Ayla. Besides cooking, sending their children off to school, taking care of family, and keeping their mud house tidy, they now get together to plant mangrove trees in the areas to create green embankments that would prove crucial not just to their survival, but to their ecosystem as well. It is the time for us to do something. If we do not plant these trees, we will vanish, remarks Sushmita Bera, who organizes mangrove plantation drives in few vulnerable villages. There are more stories like this. Next slide.
While women face unique and sometimes disproportionate burdens as a result of climate change, they are not merely victims. To the contrary, women are also agents with important perspectives and indigenous knowledge, which can inform and influence solutions to address climate change. In many communities around the world that are already acutely affected by climate change, women are having to adapt their lives to survive and care for their dependents. Therefore, they should not be viewed through these negative discourses. On the contrary, their story of resilience, of being strong, and their continuous struggle to survive in the vulnerable situations that they are forced into should also be taken into account. How their quote-unquote coming out challenges the traditional roles, which we will see in a short video. Next slide, please.
বাচ্চা কাচ্চা হয়ে গেছে তাদের একটু লেখাপড়া শেখাতে হবে এই কারণে আমার বাইরেও খাটাখাটনি করতে হয় দেখা যাচ্ছে মাটির কাজ যেখানে যে কাজ পাই ছেলাবাসি আর মাটি কাজ করি দেখা যাচ্ছে কেউ যদি বাড়ি ডাকে যে কচুর গোড়া বাঁধতে হবে গোড়া বাঁধি দেয় কেউ যদি বলে যে আমার এই ঘর লিপে দিতে হবে ঘর লিপে দেয় এমনকি মানুষ যদি বলে পায়খানাগুলো কেটে দিতে হবে টাকা দেবো তাও গরিব মানুষ আমাদের করতে হবে এইভাবে চালাই ব্যক্তি খরচটা আর কি করব আমি যখন বাইরে থাকি তখন দেখা যাচ্ছে বাচ্চা কাচ্চার পড়াশুনো বা রোগ বৃদ্ধি খাওয়া দাওয়া সমস্ত ঝামেলা আমার মাথায় নিতে হয় আমার সামলাতে হয় সংসারে বাচ্চা কাচ্চার জন্য আমার ঘেরে যেতে হবে ছেলা বাঁচতি না গাঙে যেতে হবে জাল টানতি তোমার ঘেরে ছেলা বাঁচতে গেলি পুরুষ মানুষের দেয় 200 টাকা করে আর মেয়ে মানুষের দেয় 100 টাকা করে তাই নিয়ে চাল ডাল কিনে তরি তরকারি কিনে নিয়ে বাচ্চা কাটা খাওয়ান ধাওয়ান করি নিজেও আয় করি ছেলেপিলি লেখাপড়া শিখতে পারিনি টাকা পয়সা না হলে টাকা খাতা কলম কাপড় সপড় টাকা ভরণ পোষণ যদি না দিতে পারে তা কিভাবে তারা লেখাপড়া শিখবে
In spite of the uncertain, poverty-stricken lifestyle, some women who remain in the village are challenging traditional gender roles.
So we believe in India that there is an agency that wills. This is a spiritual belief, traditional spiritual belief in India, such as yin and yang in Japanese traditional beliefs, where we believe that there's an agency that wills and there's an agency that executes the will. So the willing agency is called the Purusha or the Shiv. And the executing agency is Shakti, force, or Prakriti, as it is called in Sanskrit. I have here a poem for all of you, which is called The Dance of Prakriti, the dance of nature. And can we stem it? We will look at it. She melts the snow on mountains, tears away trees and their branches, makes the winds howl like wolves, creates storms and avalanches. She makes the rains fall fierce. Rivers gush from the mountain tops, drowning all. She is the force of Shakti. Swallowing all, she wipes out every corpse. Being for human blood, this dance of nature does not count, for we have hurt and humiliated her. Let our greed put us in the way of harm. Purusha alone can calm his prakriti. He will come down from the lofty mountains. She can now hear his anklets singing his love song. Only then will wild nature soften in the arms of her captain. Till then, let us believe in the calm after the storm. Think of Sati's Lord Shiva, who loves the storms and peace alike. Hope in the future and be kind and understanding of nature. Correct our avarice so nature cannot destroy or strike. We will go to the next slide, please. So we will try and look at women henceforth, not as victims, but as bearers of hope, not as victims who bear the brunt of every disaster, but are change makers. And with this, I will make way to the finale music piece of our panel session here today, which will uplift us.
Thank you, Papiya. And on that note of hope, I think our speakers have also stressed on the fact that along with modern solutions, with the use of technology to solve the problems that we are in today, we also need to somewhat go back to our roots and make use of the traditional knowledge that especially women very often in particular hold. So this coming piece, the coming musical piece, which talks of hope, actually draws from melodies from various folk traditions and weaves them together with the commonality in all of them that they are very joyful, hopeful tunes that emanate from a society which is living in harmony with itself and with nature. So with that, I'm going to go to the music piece.
Ador pabire, Rona একেবারে মানাইছে নাই রে যাই ভ্রমণে কৃষ্ণ অনুরাগের বাগানে সেথা যাবি প্রাণ জুড়াবি ভোলাম সেথা যাবি প্রাণ জুড়াবি ভোলা মন হায় ভোলা মন আনন্দ সমীরণে কৃষ্ণ অনুরাগের বাগানে কৃষ্ণ অনুরাগের বাগানে
Thank you so much, Ranil. Can we have our finale last slide? As they say, music be the food of life, play on. And of course, music is the soul of all our hope. But as a group here today, we would like to conclude with some policy suggestions and conclusions, humbly so. What we need today are strong narratives that speak about environmental issues and that probe us to recognize a crisis of culture and imagination. We need sufficient and adequate participation of women in development that has to be ensured. The consultation and participation of women in climate change initiatives must be ensured and the role of women's groups and networks strengthened. Currently, women are underrepresented in the decision-making process, particularly in environmental governance. You know, it's absolutely necessary to decenter the West geographically, linguistically, and culturally. We need gender analysis of all budget lines and financial instruments for climate change, because that is how we can ensure gender-sensitive investments in program for adaptation, mitigation, technology transfer, and capacity building. Gender inequalities in access to resources, including credit, extension services, information, and technology must be taken into account, particularly in developing societies in the global South, in all development activities. They need to be designed to curb and address climate change. Women need to have equal access to training, credit and skills development programs to ensure their full participation in climate change initiatives. Governments should thus be encouraged to incorporate gender perspectives into their national policies, action plans, and other measures on sustainable development and climate change through carrying out systematic and systemic gender analysis, collecting and utilizing sex disaggregated data, establishing gender-sensitive benchmarks and indicators, and developing practical tools to support increased attention to gender perspectives. Let's not forget that technology is actually never gender neutral. And when coupled with the negative effects of the changing climate, it is even less gender sensitive. In many developing countries, the access of girls and women to information and communication technology is constrained by, as we just saw, social, cultural bias, inadequate technological infrastructure, particularly in rural areas, lower education levels for women, especially in the fields of science and technology, and the fear of or the lack of interest in technology, and women's lack of disposable income to pursue and purchase these technological services. Under the current climate change finance regime, women do not have sufficient access to funds aimed at covering weather-related losses, nor do they have funds to service adaptation and mitigation technologies. We need to focus on, and we need to put the spotlight on reducing women's vulnerabilities in tandem with men's susceptibilities, promoting gender-sensitive emergency responses, and enlisting women as key environmental actors in natural disaster management decision-making processes alongside men, tapping on women's skills, resourcefulness, and leadership in mitigation and adaptation efforts. And lastly, let's never forget, must we always remember that there is never a single narrative. Everything is subjective and every silence has a voice. But last and the least, we must end on the note of acknowledging our team of musicians. Can we please put our hands together for Krishna, Priyabrata, Ronit, and Ridhita. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And an honor being with all of you here on the Global South Forum. Thank you for listening in to us. We just have a list of our sources, bibliography. Interested? I think so. We have 10 minutes, right? Am I right, Nadia? If anyone has any questions or comments, I'm sure we'd be happy to take them as a panel. Heartfelt thanks to everybody who's been conveying your comments to us on the chat window. Thank you so much.
Hi, Priyanka. I just said it in the chat, but this is Marissa. Thank you so much for, first of all, proposing this session. Climate migration is a big part of the issue that, you know, everyone faces due to climate change, but most importantly, women and children. And I'm very happy with the way you brought it across, the way in which each presenter presented their case and very strongly. Yeah, and I'm really, really happy that this was a part of the conversation at GSWF 2021. I think it was quite important, and I'm sure that a lot of us learned even more than we already knew that is already on the surface. So I really want to thank you again and all the presenters, the musicians, and also Papia, the poet, for everything. We really enjoyed this session, and we hope to see more and learn more from you.
Thank you so much, Marissa. Your words mean so much to us. It was just an idea that started amongst us. We were sitting across and we thought that instead of doing it in the typical academic way that we do it in all international conferences nowadays, particularly on Zoom, we wanted to bring in creative arts and look at the power of expression through alternative medium. And I'm so glad that it's the first time we're doing such an interactive session, weaving in various narratives from various mediums. And I'm so glad that it came across well to all of you. I would open it up to my other panel members also to speak up if they would like to say something. Papya, Suhasini, Roshni, Tanya, Ronit, please go ahead.
It was a privilege to be a part of this session today. Thank you all for listening and watching us.
Hi, this is Tanya here. First of all, there's a completely new experience for us also. And we also got to learn so much because of this forum. And thank you for all your encouraging comments and remarks. It really means a lot. Thank you so much.
Roshni?
Thank you for giving us this platform, first of all, to accept the abstract. And then that's how we began thinking about the entire show, if I can say so, to put up the entire show. Thanks for the opportunity. And it again, like as my friend Tanya said.
It's muted.
You're muted, Roshni.
Sorry. Yeah, now am I audible?
Yeah.
It was indeed a learning experience, like Tanya said, just not today, but what we have been doing, even preparing for it, sitting with the musicians, talking to them, listening to what they have to bring on the table. So yeah, thank you for making me a part of the entire panel and of this conference. Thank you.
I would just like to say something. First things first, apologies for the technical glitches. We are living in the global south. Right? And I'm very happy to be a part of this entire venture. And it all started off with us simply having a discussion or simply chatting. That is the right word that I would use. And that's when we began reflecting on certain realities. We don't learn, so to say, really from seminars, but we do learn from coffee table chatting. This is what we had in mind when we put together the entire thing. There is the art of different medium. There is painting, drawing, sketching, poetry, music, all of it, interwoven with a bit of serious academic rigor. And I am glad that it all came into place, and much glad that you liked the entire session. So thank you so much for having us here. Thanks again.
There's a question from Tehani in the chat that are there any good examples of institutional state responses in the global south to address some of these issues? Well, I would like to tell you, Tehani, that it isn't that there is just one particular feminist policy as such. I see that more in the global north, particularly if you see Canada and you see the feminist international assistance policy. In the global south, and particularly in South Asia, we are still struggling to bring in an engendering, right? The idea of engendering into policy, to bring in gender audits, and to look at when the making of the policy and the conversion into legislation and its implementation happens, that at least men and women are given, their needs are addressed on the same plane. So there isn't one great example or best practice that I can cite, unfortunately. And that also tells you about the sad scenario, but I can definitely, hopefully assure you that we are starting to bring engendering into the policy process, thanks to voices like this today. Ronit, would you like to say something?
Sure, I think I'll just echo the sentiments expressed so far, and I do this on behalf, I think, of the other musician friends who are currently here watching this live. They are more comfortable, I think, speaking through their music, so they told me that I'd better not have them speak, make them speak, or they'll be running away. So on their behalf, I thank all of you, the team led by Priyanka and all the other wonderful members who have put this together. And especially, as the others have also mentioned, a wonderful audience. Thanks, Krishna, for coming on video. That's our wonderful flautist, Krishna, and Priyobroto is there. I can see him now, the tabla player, beautiful percussion accompaniment. So yes, I mean, and it takes two sides to make an event. It takes the people who are doing something, presenting something, and then it takes the other side who is receiving it. And your wonderful comments, your appreciation throughout this program. Hello, Riddhita, good to see you, our pianist there. So your wonderful reception of the whole thing during the program really made it, feel like that this was such a wonderful experience. And I'm sure all these, the presenters here have had a few sleepless nights, but it's all worth it in the end, and very engaging overall program. Wonderful audience, lovely audience to have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ronit. And I would really like to place on record our heartfelt gratitude to the organizers for all their support. Thank you. Marissa, maybe leave the call now?
Yes, Nadia will close now.
Thank you.